Hello all. Welcome to the Employee Central Payroll LinkedIn live session. For those of you who don't know me, I am Deon van Onselen. I'm the Practice Director for Payroll at Rizing, looking after the APAC region. With me today is Sheryl Grant. I'll let her introduce herself, but Sheryl's coming with all of the knowledge of plenty of years in this space. Sheryl.
Thanks, Deon. So Sheryl Grant, I'm the Solution Centre Director here in APAC. And I just want to thank everybody for joining the session and those who are also going to join later on Catch Up. So we're going to talk about everybody's favourite topic today, which of course is payroll. So Deon, let's talk a little bit about pay slips. A lot of us are getting our pay slips via Employee Central now. So tell me a bit about what's actually changing in ECP that might impact employees in this area.
Yes, some exciting and interesting changes coming out in the H1 release for 2021. SAP has announced that they will do away with the pay statement fiori, like is the word they use for it. In essence, what that means is there's a few different ways that we can display payslips or make payslips available to employees in SuccessFactors if we're using Employee Central Payroll. One of those ways is what they call the fiori-like pay statement. This is in use with a lot of customers out there, and SAP has made the decision to move away from the fiori-like display and continue on with the pay statement direct option. So two different options. I think a few key things to call out is when this will happen. So for everyone out there that already know whether they're on a fiori-like payslip or not, SAP has announced that they will stop development of the new or the current fiori-like payslip on the 15th of October this year, roughly. It will still be under maintenance for another couple of months up until the 1st of April next year, with the aim to remove it off the landscape altogether by the 1st of October 2022. I think a key point probably is how do people know whether they are on fiori-like or not on fiori-like, the pay statement direct. One of the easiest ways to know is if you currently have an ECP system and your payroll team has to go and run a report in ECP to send results from ECP to EC, in order for the pay statements to display in EC, then you are most likely using the fiori-like pay statement. If that is not the case, then don't worry, you're already on the pay statement direct, and that will continue to be serviced later on.
So I guess, Deon, as a feature, what do you think is the benefit to employees to include that view rather than the pay slip itself that we see surfaced from Employee Central Pay?
I think it is really from a SAP point of view that SAP is proposing to say they're not going to maintain two separate ways of having the payslip displayed. They want to have a unified delivery method of having that pay statement delivered into EC. So it's really a technical change on the SAP side that's driving this more than the employee side. There's a few new key features that came out as part of one of the other releases this year, which is the custom key figures that's now available on the pay statement direct. So one of the shortcomings of the pay statement direct in the past was that you didn't have the key figures fields available the same as what you had with the fiori-like payslip. And in the second change that we want to talk about today is really those key figures statements that SAP now make available. Usually you only had the gross payment displayed for the employees. SAP has now made it available that you can have custom fields in there. So you can add in as many as you want, really. So you can have the gross pay, you can have the net pay, and the tax, for instance, underneath each other to show very similar to what the fiori-like pay statement used to be. So SAP is really driving towards having that one unified view, but to cover what customers had previously. So the customers that used to have all of the additional key figures available will now have it available going forward as well.
Do you think that would get down to the detail with adding those custom pay codes now that we'd want to show things like superannuation and deductions and even overtime and allowances? Like, how far down do you think customers will want to configure that?
It's a good question. It's really whatever you want to do, you can do. So with the effect that it's custom means that we can put anything there. So if it does make sense to put superannuation or anything like that on there, that'd be great, or leave payout or anything specific that your employees really need. One thing just to keep in mind is that only the first 3 fields will display. The rest of them, there'll be a more button which you can click and then you can see the rest of them. So when you design your system of which key figures you want to display, just have a think about what will make most sense to employees. Does it make most sense just to have the net pay in there and then key figures like superannuation or leave payout or something like that? That might be more useful to your organization, or is it more useful to have gross, net, and tax? It's really up to the customers to decide, and I think that's really the drive from SAP is customers to decide what they want to see in that space.
So I guess as I understand it, with the Pay Statement Direct making that integration easier because we don't have to replicate the payroll results into EC to actually visualize it, what would be involved for customers who might be on the Fiori-like version and they want to move across now to the Statement Direct? Like, what sort of effort and time are we looking at to do that?
Well, yeah, the key thing to call out is this is changing in the next 12 months. So I would definitely advise customers that believe they might be on the Fiori-like pay statement to get in touch with their support provider as soon as possible. Start having those discussions around what will it take to go through this. It's not a massive change. There's no change on the ECP side, so there's no new configuration or new form design that's required. But what is required is there's a change on the EC side to change over from the old display to the new display. And then there's a little bit of a business process change as well, because the pay statement will now display as soon as you've finished running your payroll, as opposed to in the past where you had control of when you sent the results across for that pay statement to display. So those are the 2 real things. Effort estimate wise, like I said, it's really on the EC side that it sits, and I don't want to put words in mouths for other consulting firms that might be out there, but get in touch with your support provider as soon as possible and just start talking about what is involved for it.
Okay. So I guess, Deon, another change I was quite excited to see in this release was around the Payroll Control Centre. We've seen that trend over a number of years of different sort of traditional technical configuration tasks that you needed consultants to do, gradually moving across into a simple admin user interface. What do you think about the new Control Centre changes?
I think it's a great thing from SAP, actually. They're really on that path to make things simpler and more usable for customers out there, as opposed to have everything locked away in a black box in the back end. And this is just one of those new changes that came in that's really playing into the customer first and the customers being able to self-serve. The change is all around managing the configuration of the validations of the Payroll Control Center. So where customers currently would have the default validations that's supplied by SAP, and those validations would have been set up during the implementation project. Those validations might be a specific check for a gross earning greater than $3,000, for instance. Mm-hmm. Now, currently, if a customer wanted that $3,000 to be updated to $3,500 just due to natural increases in the company, then they would need to get an ABAPer in to come and make a code change to change that $3,000 to $3,500. SAP has now simplified that whole approach to say that customers would be able to manage those validations with a variable. So they can decide if it's 3,000 and half a year later we want to change it to 3,500. They can go into the system themselves, go and manage that configuration of the Payroll Control Center and change that 3,000 to 3,500. So just really for customers to self-serve on stuff that should be within their realm to change. Now, one thing to note on this though is We do have a lot of customers out there that utilize the Spinifex validation report and Spinifex KPIs. Just note that if you're utilizing the Spinifex KPIs, you already have that capability through Spinifex. So they would not be touched by this change. But if you are using the SAP standard validation rules, that is when this change will come in to make things a little bit easier for you.
And I think it's the validation rules, and it's also the little KPI analytics tiles that we see as well.
Yes, you're correct. It is the KPI analytics as well. Yes, those little tiles.
Okay. So is there any other changes that you'd expect customers to be tweaking using that config access?
It's really the validation reports that they do and the KPIs. Those are the three things that I really see them updating through that piece.
Yeah, I just love it because I think it's going to provide a really tangible benefit to payroll teams, because you can make those changes quickly, and you can also do it internally. So it's simpler for the business, and I guess it's also reduces costs as well in terms of support.
Sure does. It sure does, and it just the simplification of it is the real key there. Makes it simple to just maintain it as you want going forward, and the real benefit is to the time saving there for payroll teams. It's about being able to self-serve, being able to get things right, not having to wait for a service provider to come in, do a technical spec just to do a small update like that.
Yep. Great. So what about what's happening in the replication space?
Yes, SAP has released two changes really in the replication space for this year. One of them is that you can have time-dependent replication framework, is what they call it, whereby you can activate certain new features delivered for the replication of master data from your chosen effective date. In simple speak, what that means is you've got a new business rule in your Employee Central system that you want to apply, but you don't want this new rule to be effective backdated. You only want it to be effective from a specific pay period forward, so to not affect other employees or past historical records. You can now implement it date effective with a start date of when this will affect replication going forward. So quite a nice change for SAP on this. Worth noting that as per most of these changes, they are linked to a support pack version as well. So it's not just the half-yearly SuccessFactors change coming in, but make sure that you are also on the correct support pack on the ECP side. Otherwise, you'll have the benefit, or you'll see the benefit on the EC side, but it won't take effect in the replication going across to ECP.
And which support pack do customers need to be up to?
At this stage, it looks like support pack 93 will be the sync point. I suppose they'll release a specific sync point 93. It's not available yet, but will be available as far as I believe. But yeah, 93 seems to be the one that we're targeting.
And also with that, the replication of the master data with the chosen effective date, you mentioned changes to bank records, which is a really familiar one, I guess, for all of it. But can you think of any past examples where not being able to have that feature has caused issues?
Well, yes, it's really it's happened in the past with other customers where they go in and put in a new business rule to say, due to EBA changes, we want to now limit employees from, or rather allow employees to update something specific. So update a uniform allowance or something in the system which they previously couldn't, and that had to drive a business rule. If we were to not allow it to go backdated, then we're pretty safe because we're not allowing employees to go back and change retrospective records that was already approved. Whereas if you're going forward, you have approvals in place with workflows, and just for your auditing purposes, you wanted that to only be effective dated from a date forward. That is one example that I've seen where that really works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is there anything else just in that replication space that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, there was a second change that's coming in with regards to rule functions that gets the next possible date of change. So what SAP has done is SAP has said there's a need in the system for us to prevent people from making changes to past payroll data. So we want to allow employees to go into the system and they can go and update bank details, for instance. Now, if you update bank details in the past, then you get errors in the system and replication doesn't work quite correctly, and you get issues with payroll side. So what SAP has done is SAP has made a feature available whereby we can allow certain roles in the business to make changes either retrospectively or not retrospectively. And bank details is one of those good ones where we want to allow employees to make changes to their bank details going forward, but we don't want them to make it backdated or even for the current payroll period. So what SAP has done is just to make a function available to say, get the next appropriate date when the employee can make that change on. So if we're currently busy with payroll, the employee won't be able to make that change for the current payroll because we're busy with payroll. SAP will then advise what the next correct date is for that employee to make that change on, so the start of the next payroll period. So quite a nifty little function that SAP has made available, and I think it's going to help a lot in just the employee experience. So employees can still go ahead and make changes, but we are safeguarding them against making incorrect changes in the system. So quite a nifty change there.
Yep. And I guess we're just talking on bank files or bank changes before. In relation to bank files, I understand that some customers may be unaware of the ability to encrypt the outgoing bank file, and I see that SuccessFactors has actually highlighted this as a compliance feature in this release. So can you tell us a bit about that one?
Yes, indeed. So what SAP has done is released a change in the H1 release to say that you can now run a bank transfer program that will encrypt your bank file. Now, how this works, simplest form is you go into your payroll control center, you generate the bank file gets generated on the application server, and then you want that bank file to be encrypted before you move it onto your SFTP side. SAP has made it available for you to do an encryption program through CPI. So when CPI picks up that file from the application server, it encrypts the file before it gets sent across into the SFTP network where more people might have access to it. Now, this has been available for a while as a solution. However, it wasn't widely communicated, and I think SAP is taking the chance through this half-year release really just to make that available to everyone. Rizing have been offering this to customers for quite a while, but it's nice to see SAP actually highlighting that to everyone and just saying we are making PGP encryption available through CPI in order for these processes.
Okay, so I guess with the impact on customers that they do need to get technical consulting support to make the change?
Yes. Yeah, it will definitely be a technical change, unfortunately, because the actual PGP encryption part happens in the CPI, so it is the cloud platform integration consultant that would need to make that change.
And I guess if a customer didn't put this change in, what's the implications if they don't make the update?
Well, the biggest implication really is around the compliance part. So it is about the customer feeling secure with where their bank details are going. We know that ECP is running on a cloud version of the solution. So when you generate the bank file, the bank file is generated in a fairly secure environment in the application server. However, to get the file off that application server, someone has to log in, grab the file, and then bring it into your client network. Now, that process of picking up the file and moving it into a network is the part that we feel that it's not really secure. And that's where you want the encryption to happen before that file is picked up. So what CPI does is it picks up the file, moves it across. So it just makes that whole process more secure. And I think that's the benefit to customers as well, is just that knowing that they'll be more secure going forward, but they'll need to action it. If they don't action it, it's not going to break any of their processes. They'll still be operating the same as they do today, but probably not as secure as they can be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good incentive, isn't it?
Definitely.
Okay, so let's move on to some of the country-specific changes that are happening for the APAC region.
Yeah, so there's one specific that caught my eye this time around. It is a new gender field being made available for the, it's Austria actually, and then Australia and New Zealand as well. Now, with the current pick lists that's there, there's always the need to have the unspecified gender, so the unknown or the don't want to divulge it option that is needed for Australia really. And by the looks of it, SAP is now making that available as a predefined checklist or pick list rather on the EC side. And obviously for that to be a predefined pick list on the one side, we need to have it as a standard mapping on the ECP side as well. So there's just two parts to this change. It's the EC side and then the ECP side. That where it really comes in. But from your side, from the Solution Center perspective, I know you've got a lot of experience on the EC side. How do you see this working, and how is it different to what we've had?
Well, I guess and we haven't got the config notes out yet, but I just expect with this being housed under the global information, or under the global section of personal information, that apart from adding in the new field for that, putting in it's a country specific pick list, so one for each of those countries, and linking that up to the field, we then have to do the role-based permission changes around that to make that available. Yeah. And I think you mentioned earlier too about with the change, then we're passing that gender value through into Employee Central Payroll, that the support packs will take care of the mapping of those new values. I think from a reporting perspective, it's great for us to see that those type of updates for the fields that have an impact on an organisation, their ability to execute on their diversity and inclusion strategy. Obviously, you need the data in the system. So this is a step forward with being able to capture that. We're capturing it in a more sensitive area under the global information. As you mentioned, you've got options there if people don't want to declare it or it's unknown. But we can't do those more detailed reporting and support future legislative changes if we don't actually have the fields in there. So this is a good step forward in that area.
And it is one of those where a lot of customers that's already live on SuccessFactors probably have something similar in place already, either via additional pick list options that they've added in EC and just made the mapping arrangement in the back end in ECP already. This is really just SAP catching up with that and saying we want to make that available as the standard off the shelf solution.
Yep. Yeah. We had some changes in Singapore as well.
Yes, we did. So Singapore had a few new changes come in. One of them was around the addresses field, corporate addresses versus home addresses. Some additional fields that was made available specifically for that around block number, floor number, unit number, and the likes, just to more accurately capture the addresses that's needed for reporting in Singapore. And then the other major one that we've seen is they've added a new field for the CCL start from year of birth, which is just around that childcare leave provisioning that they've got in Singapore, to be able to capture that year of birth of each of the dependents for that. So those are two well, actually few additional fields, but two major key points that they've made provision for, which I think would be great for the Singapore side of the business, where there's a lot of additional config that was required to cater for these fields in the past. Now SAP is making them standard so that it would just be easier to implement.
Awesome. So are there any other additional changes that you feel are notable that you wanted to touch on today?
Yeah, SAP has released a few other topics. One thing probably to just call out, I'm not going to go through any of the timesheet or time off changes that has come out as part of H1. We've got a separate LinkedIn Live session tomorrow around Time Tracker, where I'll cover off anything timesheet or time off related. So please join me for that session if you're more interested to learn a little bit more about the time tracking side. But back onto normal ECP things, there was a few additional things that came out. One of them that caught my eye was the generic handling of secondary info type records. So basically what that means is you might have, in some countries, for instance, on info type 2, there's a secondary info type that needs to get created for the national ID card. Now, if you don't maintain the national ID card in ECP, what would have happened is replication would have fallen over if you tried to update the fields in info type 2 from your EC fields, because it needed to create the secondary info type, but there was no data to create it with. SAP has now released a solution whereby it will automatically create a blank info type entry for the secondary info type, so that you can still save the primary info type correctly without it affecting the secondary info type. An example of this for the Australian side of the world, if they want to just have context around it, is where we've got our tax info type and we've got our tax file number info type as a secondary info type. Basically what would happen is SAP is saying if you create the one, it would create a dummy of the other info type so that the system doesn't fall over. Now we know tax file number and tax records go hand in hand, so that's probably not the best example, but that is just an example of a primary and secondary info type. So that's one of the changes that came in, that I think is, again, just one of those where SAP is seeing a need from customers to say things should work a little bit more streamlined, and they're doing the effort to make things work properly and streamlined between EC and ECP. The other one that really caught my eye was the currency conversion for the higher duty / temporary assignment solution. Now, this is a public sector solution, the temporary assignment higher duty solution. You can sort of retrofit it for the private sector as well, but this usually doesn't happen a lot of that. So for the public sector, what SAP has done is if you create the temporary assignment or higher duty record in EC, and you might have a difference in the currency used on the temporary assignment or higher duty info type versus the employee's base pay info type. Now, I know this very technical terms for some people, but bear with me. The higher duties info type might have a currency of Australian dollar, whereas the base pay info type might have Australian dollar to decimal 4 places. So SAP is just saying that they're aligning those two currencies there so that the currency conversion happened correctly. Obviously, if you talk currency conversion, you immediately think that, it could work for different countries. And yes, it could work for different countries. So if you have a currency that is different currency from one info type to another, SAP will do the currency conversion. But the real aim of this is between the different decimal places between the two info types.
Okay.
And those were the two really big ones that I picked up thus far.
And Deon, I can see we've been having a few comments coming in through the chat there, but basically it looks like the audience is exchanging some very nice configuration tips, but I can't see any questions. So I think we'll wrap up. Deon, thanks for taking us through those changes today, because we all know that payroll is the most important thing in all of our lives.
Yeah, it sure is in mine, for sure. I just love to breathe these things. Thank you, everyone, for your time today as well. Really appreciate it.
So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, or if you prefer to ask offline, don't hesitate to message us directly on LinkedIn. But thanks for joining, and I hope you enjoyed today's session.